Hello, I'm Vicky Young and welcome to Politics Live. With me today, Labour MP Preet Gill, Liberal Democrat MP Tim Farron and political consultant and former Conservative advisor Anita Boateng. And we'll also be joined by the former Tory leader Ian Duncan Smith to talk about the Prime Minister's trip to China. Keir Starmer has now touched down in Beijing. Our political editor Chris Mason is with him and will join us live. Also today, why are there so many illegal waste sites across the country? And why can't the authorities deal with them? And with the Prime Minister away, his deputy David Lammy will be taking questions in the Commons at noon. And we want to hear from you. If you have any thoughts on those stories or questions for our panel, we want to hear your voice. You can get in touch using the details on screen now, and we look forward to hearing from you. So, the Prime Minister has done his overnight flight to Beijing and has now landed. He is hoping for better trade ties with China, but it is a controversial visit. Our political editor, Chris Mason, has been travelling with the Prime Minister and joins us now. Chris, what is the Prime Minister hoping to achieve with this trip?
Yeah, hello to you, Vicky, from a rather chilly Beijing, where Wednesday has just flown by for us in a combination of a long-haul flight and a big time difference, so we're well into the evening here. The Prime Minister wants to reboot, if you like, the UK's relationship with China. His diagnosis is that it's gone, that relationship, from a golden age. You might recall David Cameron having a pint in a pub in Oxfordshire with President Xi some years ago, to what he sees, Keir Starmer, as an ice age more recently, a very frosty relationship between the two countries. Today is the first time in 8 years since a British Prime Minister has been here to China. It was Theresa May last, back in 2018. So he wants to deepen and broaden the economic and cultural ties. He sees China as a coming world power, a superpower economically and increasingly militarily, and sees it as pragmatic to deepen that relationship. And he's brought a whole plane load of business leaders, corporate figures, cultural figures to try and emphasise that point. And I think as well to slightly, if you like, act as a shield against that never hear Keir moniker that gets thrown around his neck by his political critics because of the amount of time he spends abroad. But he is already facing criticism back home and indeed beyond about whether there is a naivety about getting closer to a power like China that is so wildly different in worldview. We've heard that view articulated in the last half hour or so by Kemi Badenoch, the Conservative leader, saying she wouldn't be here if she was Prime Minister right now. So that's a very live question. But I detect, Vicky, that is going to be a live question for this Prime Minister and his successors going ahead decades. How does the UK and how do our Western allies manage a relationship with a country like China that is unignorable but is so very different?
And just on that, actually, Chris, I mean, what does the Prime Minister say about how he's going to deal with the issues of human rights abuses, for example, in China? He's presumably saying that it is something that he does want to speak to Chinese leaders about.
Yeah, we had a word with the Prime Minister overnight on the plane over here about exactly that. He did what he calls, or what we call, a huddle, which is exactly that. All the reporters right next to the toilet, actually, on the plane, huddling around the Prime Minister, firing questions at him. There's bits of turbulence. We're all rocking around all over the place and we can barely hear him because obviously planes are quite noisy. Anyway, we did ask about a whole range of issues, not least, of course, the whole issue around human rights and the Uyghurs, Jimmy Lai, the pro-democracy campaigner in Hong Kong, and how he will go about, the Prime Minister, managing that diplomacy in the conversations with President Xi tomorrow. He didn't really want to give us a kind of preview of his conversational or diplomatic or negotiating strategy, but made it clear that in the past these difficult conversations have happened with other leaders, and then we've been told about them or given a version of those conversations afterwards in what's called a readout from those meetings, and we can anticipate the same again this time. So I suspect it will be raised, and the argument the government makes is that you can only raise those issues properly if you're in the room, that if you're not, it's much harder to make that argument. One other thought, Vicky, I was talking to a business leader on the plane here, just a fascinating vignette this about the world economy right now, and this business leader was saying that their business is being limited in America, they are shrinking in America because of the threat around tariffs, which can just wipe out a business model overnight, whereas they are growing here. Now, yes, doing business here comes with challenges that you might not have in America or elsewhere, but the instability, this leader was telling me right now as far as America is concerned, means eyes tilt more keenly in this direction to the east.
And Chris, finally, there was a lighter moment on the plane. You all had a bit of a surprise when a familiar voice came across the tannoy, I think, as you were coming into land. Let's have a listen to this.
Have you all with us for this historic trip. This is the first Prime Minister trip to China in 8 years, and we've got an excellent delegation on board from business, culture, art, sport, and we're going to unlock opportunities for our country. And finally, can I say, sit back, enjoy the rest of the flight. I'll be bringing the plane in from here. Thank you.
I did hear someone muttering, "I've got a parachute," actually, Chris, at the end of that on the plane. I mean, he does seem in a pretty good mood, despite everything that's been going on back here.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It took us all by surprise, that, 'cause it's a sort of very familiar voice coming through with that kind of tannoy-type sound, and with that gag at the end. Yeah, he does seem in chipper mood. He is genuinely exasperated with what he sees as the dogmatism of recent years as far as the relationship with China is concerned. He's been building up to this trip for quite a while. So the business secretary came out in September, the Chancellor was out a year ago, the now Deputy Prime Minister, former Foreign Secretary David Lammy, out a little before that. So this is the culmination of all of that, and you get every sense that he's been looking forward to this.
OK, Chris, have a good trip, and thank you very much indeed for joining us today. I mean, lots to talk about around China. And Ian, if I can come to you first, former Conservative leader, of course, Ian Duncan-Smith, you don't think the Prime Minister should be there, do you?
I don't think so at the moment, because I think that what's gone on is, in a way, that the government's been bullied into going over there with the embassy. So the whole target was to get the embassy, the super embassy here, agreed to by the Chinese government. It's the biggest embassy in Europe, and it is right in the centre of activities. City, London, or even the security service have made it clear that communications will be interrupted with this. But they're carrying out here domestically, with no apology, a real crackdown on the dissidents, you know, the Hong Kong dissidents that are here. I mean, you talk to any of them, and I talk to a lot of them, you know, they're getting dragged into illegal police stations. They're getting threatened constantly. Their families are threatened back at home. They're told unless they go back, they will be punished here and at home. And then at the same time, they're getting British citizens, they're getting letters from the embassy saying, if you bring this individual who's living in your area in now, then their bounty on their head will be paid to you at the embassy. All of this stuff is just under the radar most of the time, but it's going on the whole time. They have constantly dominated debates in universities. We've got a real problem now with the influence of China in many of our leading universities. A lot of the technology stuff is taken straight back to China. I mean, here domestically right now, they have taken over significant amounts of our critical services, water, electricity, things. You look at the numbers that are now owned by China. They carry on with the Internet of Things, that is the things, the listening devices that were in Downing Street cars, the kill switches that are on their buses, the kill switches that are on the solar arrays. And let's be honest, how much is it a genuine competition when the country subsidises against the WTO rules, subsidises business bids to 100% of bid value, they kill all the competition. And secondly, solar arrays and many other things we know for a fact have had involvement of slave labour in them, and we have bought those things because they were leaving us with no choice. This is the ground level that we are at the moment. Do you trust a government like that to ever stick to an agreement? They trashed the Sino-British agreement, absolutely trashed it, and arrested democracy campaigners. That was an international agreement. How much do you really think they'll stick to anything they agree to here?
Preet, there's a lot of criticism there of China. Is the Prime Minister right to have gone?
The Prime Minister, since being elected, has returned Britain back to the table as a trusted partner, and that matters. One thing he's been very clear about, he will never compromise on national security. China is the third largest trading partner. 60 CEOs have accompanied him. Of course, this is really important. Diplomacy is about having shared interests, finding common interests that you can work on. That doesn't mean to say we shy away from some of the other challenges, the Jimmy Lai, human rights, and these are not things that a pragmatic leader like Keir Starmer will shy away from. But equally, he knows that this relationship is really important and we've got to build allies. And I'm sorry, under the Conservatives, under David Cameron, the sale of the embassy that we're talking about took place in 2018. And let's not forget GCHQ and MI5 have written a letter saying that they're satisfied with the mitigations that have taken place. It's an independent decision taken by the Secretary of State for Housing and Local Government. And of course, this will be kept under review. I have great confidence in our intelligence services and in MI5. And like I said, the Prime Minister will never compromise on national security.
Okay, I want to bring the rest of the panel in a second, but just on that, on the embassy, what do you say to what Preet's saying, that actually our services, secret services, have said they're OK with it?
Well, first of all, I'm going to be clear. I opposed this even when it was first discussed. So no matter who's in government, I'm in opposition when it comes to this, let me tell you categorically. The second bit about it, that's not exactly true about the services. What they have said is they cannot, on the day of the agreed, they said in a written letter jointly with GCHQ that they cannot guarantee that the threats emanating from this embassy can all be dealt with. So there is at last an absolute guarantee on this. And here's the other bit. The government said constantly these communication cables to the city and Canary Wharf and intelligence cables that go right past the embassy, not a problem, they
But
said.
I think they're also saying that they have put mitigations in place.
Well, here's the mitigation they've now owned up to. They're going to move them at huge cost to the taxpayer. They've suddenly admitted they can't have them sitting here. Why didn't they come clean about that from the beginning? So my concern right now is, listen, we're going to deal with China anyway. You know, when it comes to financial services, which are our biggest export to China, they already happen because there's no tariffs involved. They just go through. The problem is goods. They will dump their goods on us. You bet this. They do it to every country they do, and our businesses, the car industry, will go out of business.
OK,
no
Tim, do you think the Prime Minister should have gone?
No, he definitely should not have gone. I absolutely take the point that we should be seeking good diplomatic relations with all countries and all leaders. If we only spend time talking to those leaders and those countries that share our values completely, we'll talk to nobody. So I get that diplomacy is very, very, very important. But for all the reasons that Ian has said and more, I am deeply concerned. I mean, a real naivety from Keir Starmer to say, oh, isn't it a shame that it's got a bit frosty over the last few years? Yeah, on one side and one side only. If you beat up Hong Kong citizens on the streets of the United Kingdom and drag them into the consulate in Manchester, if you're doing appalling things, genocide to the Uyghurs, if you're involved in spying on our land, on our territory, within our very parliament, blocking UK parliamentarians from going into the country. My friend Vera Hobhouse went to see her newborn grandson in Hong Kong last year, blocked from going in because she's a British parliamentarian. So yeah, there's a frostiness because of the way China behave. So it's also worth bearing in mind, yes, trade is a good thing. The trade is a way of being able to establish relationships. But let's not pretend that the Chinese economy isn't going one way and one way only, and that is to greater and greater and greater self-sufficiency.
But that's no choice at all.
They want to trade, but they want to export. They're not
I'll bring
really
Anita in a second.
interested in
Just answer that point.
I think that's no choice at all. On one hand, you're saying, yes, you understand we've got to have diplomatic relationships because we've got to find common shared grounds. At the same time, you can have the difficult conversations, all of the issues that Tim and Ian have raised. These are things, of course, the Prime Minister pragmatically will be raised. He's a human rights lawyer prior to coming to Parliament. He understands this better than probably all of us.
Anita?
I think there's been a huge naivety, and I think the word used, Tim, is exactly right, which is initially when Labour came into power, you know, he had Rachel Reeves going over there, getting a quite paltry, I would say, £500 million in investment. Like, the Chinese economy is going towards self-sufficiency, but it's also kind of hitting relative challenges right now. And so what they are looking for is an export economy. And when you look at foreign direct investment, we're currently at sort of 0.5 billion from China, in contrast to UK companies investing about 4 billion in China. So there is a little naivety about what a realistic trading agreement could be. And the one thing we haven't spoken about on this panel that is really, really critical is China's role in Ukraine, an issue which is of fundamental security to Europe, where China, both through its technology, you know, what was one of the reasons why Ukraine Ukraine is struggling right now, it's because of drones as a result of tools supplied by China, and also the fact that Russian oil and gas has a market now in China.
Bingo.
And so this is a fundamental issue of security. I actually don't think that Keir Starmer should not have gone, but I do think the UK government approach is not to really understand China's motivations and what it really desires, but instead to see this as a straightforward transactional relationship as you would have with any other country. And that is what I think is going to be a huge
Let
challenge.
Preet answer that.
None of the issues that you've raised are things that Keir Starmer or the Cabinet haven't actually addressed. They're absolutely happy to address head-on these issues, and businesses, the country expects a Prime Minister who is going to go out and bat for them in their best interests economically, but clearly on the other issues, as you say, I know Keir Starmer will pragmatically address these issues. Fundamentally, national security matters, and we've made that very clear. We won't compromise. You've got to continuously renew this. Let's not forget the Chinese already have 9 different sites. Bringing them all in one place, GCHQ and MI5 have actually said that's a good thing. The mitigations, they do seem satisfied. Let's not forget, our intelligence services are aware of their remit. They deal with embassies here. This is not the first time we're having an embassy in the United Kingdom. We know that there is espionage and transnational repression by many countries. Of course, our intelligence services will be aware of that.
Listen, it's not a case of being aware of it. The reality is that there are 200 extra so-called diplomats going to be moving into this embassy. They have not allowed anybody to know what the rooms that they've now got down below are about. The clear question is not everything emanates from the embassy as well. Anyway, the police stations I talked about, they're here out with the embassy. You've got all the other institutions like their consulates, etc., where they operate from. The main point here is the point that's just been made is really important. On every front, China is in a different position from us. Russia would never have invaded Ukraine if China hadn't given the go-ahead. They are supporting Russia. Oil purchases that are banned. They go technology, exactly the point made. That Myanmar is being supported, the brutal regime in Myanmar is supported every day in weapons and money by China. And if you have a company, I have spoken to endless companies, by the way, who have gone out to China, who demands that they put up manufacturing facilities in there, pharmaceutical companies, etc. And one particular one I was talking to said they had to close it down. Why? Because they had their IP stolen and they suddenly discovered their drugs generically being manufactured in China. That, under the WTO, is illegal, but China does it all the time.
Ian, I want to ask you...
Eyes wide open, please, not just this vague idea, let's get close to China.
You were sanctioned by the Chinese government in 2021.
For raising the genocide in Xinjiang. They simply sanctioned me
and just what impact does that have on your life?
Well, my family are all sanctioned too, so they are under restrictions, every one of them, even though they've had nothing to do with what I do in this regard. You just live with it. I don't go anywhere. I can't go to China, not that I'm heading there. And I've had a wolf warrior impersonating me around the world. We've managed to silence that for a while.
What does that mean?
Wolf warriors are low-level operatives for Chinese security. You've got to understand, China's obsessive about being after people like myself and others who criticise them. They don't let them go. They break into your phones. They do everything else. And the wolf warrior literally sets up to try and impersonate me and say how much I've changed my views, that I'm no longer to be trusted, that I write to people. So lots of people around the world, senators and others that have come back to me and said, I don't understand why you're writing to me to tell you how much you love President Xi. So this whole idea about tracking you, it goes on all the time. And by the way, every bit of data produced by Chinese companies is owned by the Chinese government under the new national security law. So ByteDance that owns TikTok. TikTok is a data harvester for China now, and they sift that data. Because what will they do with all that data? They sift it looking for people who are going to move on, eventually younger people going into high levels of employment. They're after them. This happens strategically every day of our lives. And I'm not being angry about it. I'm not being naive. It's exactly the point. China poses the biggest single threat we have faced since the end of the Second World War.
OK. Preet, just answer that point there.
Well, look, I think one of the things that we've all agreed and said is we've got to have a relationship with China, and you do need to have dialogue. The only way you really build trust and able to talk about some of the difficult issues and security issues are if you have a relationship in the first place. It is right that the Prime Minister visits. The last visit was in 2018. German leaders have gone. We've seen the Canadian Prime Minister attend. It's not that Western leaders are not engaging. They understand
I was going to put
we
that
must engage.
point, actually, to Tim and Anita about the fact that other world leaders have gone recently.
Yeah. And I think it's really important that ministers go. I'm not against a visit at all. I just think that the UK spends, in some ways, it spends a lot of time trying to really, really understand America, and sometimes thinks America is like the UK. It spends so little time trying to understand the nuances, complexities, and motivations of a lot of China. And so, therefore, we see it as a straightforward transactional relationship. We see it as Preet keeps saying, oh, we're going to address these issues. I don't know what that meaningfully means when you're talking about something such as Ukraine. And so I don't think we take our hard power, real kind of strategic
on the
approach
UN
to doing
Security
this.
Council. I mean, that's really important. Of course, we don't accept their position in terms of Russia, but they do have a seat on the UN Security Council. We do have to work with them on these issues.
When all said and done, I feel there are some crossovers here, some similarities with how the Prime Minister has had his posture towards Donald Trump in America. And it feels that that posture is one of subservience, of kowtowing, of trying to make compromises. And if it looks like, and I really regret this, but if it looks like the world is settling into camps, it's blindingly obvious which camp the UK should be in terms of expanding our trade, our prosperity and our security. And it's our friends just over the channel in Europe. And so by all means, maintain diplomatic relations with these people, but they are not reliable trading partners or allies. They are often up to deeply wicked stuff that is against the national security of this country. Over the water, we have several 100 million people who do share our values, and with an economy where we could grow massively our own prosperity, that's where it should be focused.
Okay, the world, as we find it, given that it's contested, it isn't a choice just between the EU and China. It's both. You've got to do both.
OK, Ian, look, before you go, you're here and obviously a former Conservative leader. A lot of your colleagues leaving to go to Reform UK. Suella Braverman was the most recent. What do you make of what's going on?
Well, I think it's inevitable that some people will peel off because they get frustrated, they're not happy about certain things. That happens in political parties. We're in a peculiar area of churn, I think. You look at the Labour Party in government now at very low levels. What we have to recognise, though, is that the Conservative Party in government is a government party. It knows how to deliver. It knows what it's going to do. I think Kemi has been excellent in holding the government to account, but also to enunciate exactly what she believes we are as a party. Well, we made mistakes. I wasn't in government, but I pointed them out at the time. We made some big mistakes in government. COVID was a disaster, all those sort of things. But the key point now is you have to ask this question, who do you really want to govern? To govern, not to protest, but to govern at the end of the day. And I simply say to some of my colleagues who may be talking about this, I say to govern is a very different matter of just being a political party that can spot everything that you think is going wrong. It's about changing that and having a programme. And I simply say, Kemi, for me, has got it.
But do you think reform poses an existential threat to your party? It's not just people leaving your party, it's voters abandoning your party as well.
They're angry. Voters are angry, and you can see that now in the ballot box. Across the major parties, they can see that, quite right. We have to put that right and show, it's going to take time, that actually we understand what went wrong and we'll put it right. But we are still that centre-right party that understands what people's aspirations are all about. She's enunciated that really well, I think, today, and she's done it on other occasions. And my personal view is it'll take us time for people to settle that not just you're angry and you want to protest, but you also want to know how you put these things right and who do you really, would you trust to have a programme that really does
And what about some in your party who, we had someone in the seat, Amber Rudd, actually, a couple of days ago, who think that it's a chance to pivot more to the centre-right?
Do you know what? The one thing I love about politics and politicians is that we always think that we have the answer to everything, and therefore if only you can get the government or the leader of the party to go and shift in this. And as being a leader of a party, you get constantly this process. I trust Kemi. She knows where she wants to go, and I will back her and get her there if I possibly can.
OK, Ian Ducker-Smith, thank you very much indeed for joining us today. Now, let's talk about something completely different, and that is about the illegal dumps containing tens of thousands of tonnes of rubbish, which are operating illegally in lots of places around England. And understandably, those who live near to them are extremely frustrated and very angry about what is going on and the fact that it can't be solved, it seems. Let's speak to one of those, who is Nick Cook. You are near the site in Over, just outside Gloucester, and you are on the vice chairman, in fact, of the parish council. Just explain to us what's been going on there in your area.
Well, we've had material being dumped, which is all sorts of toxic material, a variety of sorts of material, being dumped over the last 7 years. It started off obviously as a fairly small site, and then gradually it's grown, and at its height we've had about 10 lorries a day, each with a payload of 20 tons. So you can see how that's built up. Now it's built up, we've recalculated the area, it's around about 5 acres. And it's a great mountain of waste, which is being leveled over, has diggers on the site. This is a big operation. And we started complaining to the Environment Agency about it to say, could you do something about it? Because it's clearly illegal, clearly toxic material that's been tipped here. And we've been doing this, and particularly last 2.5 years, we've been sort of writing to the Environment Agency literally every week, and we aren't the only ones. And literally nothing has stopped. It's gone on unabated. It's gone quiet just recently, and we think that's probably because of the publicity. But the Environment Agency, we just get standard letters back from them. And meanwhile, this is polluting the local water courses. There's a River Leaden, which leads into the Severn, perhaps half a mile away. There's a floodplain there. We get fires. So it's a pretty ghastly situation, and it seems no way of stopping it.
I mean, it seems like a pretty large-scale operation. Do you have any idea who's doing it?
Well, you hear things. We understand that the owners are known. I'm not prepared to divulge that now, but they are known. And this is what's so odd, because it's criminal behaviour. People have had threats from the owners. So on quite a number of levels, this is antisocial, unacceptable behaviour. And yet the agencies which are charged to look after this and deal with it just aren't doing it. And we don't know what's happening.
Nick, stay with us, because we've got some politicians here who, I don't know if they've got any answers, but Preet, I mean, this is not an isolated case. What's the answer here? Why is nothing being done? It's happening in lots of different places across the country.
Yeah, I mean, this is unacceptable, and nobody should have to live amongst this. And, we know that this is organised crime. And that's why the police reforms in terms of a national policing agency will absolutely be dealing with this sort of thing, because I know local governments don't have the power. Now, the Environment Agency has been given an additional capacity by 50% by the government in terms of doing enforcement. People want to see action, not the build-up of the tons of waste as we're seeing, but very early on when we do start seeing people turning up to some of these sites. Now, the Environment Agency are saying that they've closed down around 500 tips. There are lots of measures that the government is bringing in, so we need to make sure people have a proper licence, and we do background checks and those that are trying to set up these sites. We've included scrap metal as part of this as well now. You've got to have a proper licence. There's got to be penalties. But this is organised crime, and we've absolutely got to get a grip of it. And, the Environmental Agency has got to do much more.
Tim, I mean, you can hear the frustration there from Nick that nothing seems to be being done. Yeah. What's the answer?
Yeah, well, look, first of all, I mean, the Environment Agency have closed down. I think they've closed down more than 500, but they've not tackled another 500. There are, I think, 11 sites around the country of 20,000 tonnes or more. My Lib Dem colleague, my friend Callum Miller from Bicester and Woodstock, in his constituency in Kidlington, the site there is 150 metres long, 6 metres deep, and it's still there after 7 months. So the Environment Agency has been given some additional resource. There's a lot of double counting here, because that additional resource is all about dealing with sewage and waterways. It's not to do with this at all. And the EA is under-resourced to do it. This is a national criminal issue. And what the Liberal Democrats are calling for is just that it should be treated as a priority by the National Crime Agency, that there should also be a dedicated hotline, always staffed 24/7, so that people can report these things. Because we say there was, best part of 1,000, maybe more than 1,000 sites last year, only half of which got cleared up. But that's all that we know. There are many more as well. We do know also that more than a third of these sites are linked to serious organised crime. It's all criminal, 100% of it is criminal. But so there's an issue there. If the National Crime Agency is able to tackle this, not only will they stop this antisocial, very dangerous, environmentally dangerous practice happening, you're also potentially going to crack some other criminal activity as well, because it's all coming from the same sources.
I just want to have a listen as well to Anisha Rosen. This is someone else who's been impacted by this. She lives next door to a huge illegal waste site near Wigan. This is what she sent in to us.
So from this tip alone, we have had rats. As you can see, we've had to rip the ceiling apart to get some bait up there to kill the rats off. Now we do have dead rats living in our cavities, so the smell isn't great. I have children with special needs, and one of them has sensory processing issues. So since this tip arrived in October 24, he's been spending 1 to 2 days a week in our home, and it just makes him physically sick. He just can't live at home. It's making him ill. It's affecting his development and all our mental health. This has torn our family to bits.
Anita, you can again hear the frustration there, and these are sites that have been there for months, years in some cases.
Yeah.
I mean, you can hear the frustration. Do you think this feeds into the feeling of lots of people that the country isn't working properly? Why can't the agencies deal with this? Someone must be responsible.
Yes, and I'm so not the kind of person that comes in and says, well, everything is awful, and but I do think that this is one of those things that is a sort of symbol that we're not quite getting to grips with things. And I would say that actually, so just to kind of explain how this really works, is there's quite a lot of people who understandably want to get rid of waste, so they call someone up and they get told, okay, fine, we'll take it for this kind of competitive price, and then it gets illegally dumped. So I think there's two things. Of course, this is straightforward criminal behaviour, and I do think that the police need to be much more involved in this, because the regulator absolutely, is under-resourced, was always going to be under-resourced, and tends to be good at dealing with people misbehaving rather than acting illegally. And this is straightforward illegal behaviour, so I do think it's a criminal matter. I also do think that as a society, we do need to be more responsible and more aware of our waste. Like, we are in a society where we continue to produce more and more and more waste, and it does have to go somewhere. And I think that we, in general, take a slightly irresponsible approach to dealing with it, i.e., can someone pay for it? Not how do I minimise, how do I recycle? And I'm not the person that is always banging that drum, but I think that this is becoming a much, much more acute problem, and particularly we don't see it so much in the cities, but really I think in these big sites that are hazardous on so many different levels. And so I really do think we need to see a lot more action on this.
I just want to bring Nick back in. What's the next step for you as a council and for residents there?
I think we've reluctantly, we've had these letters from the Environment Agency, please don't go to the press, don't compromise our situation. And we've had this over years now. And so we've said, well, this is enough's enough. We're going to the MP, we've come to the press, and it seems to have hit I just hope the Environment Agency actually does grasp this nettle. Because what we're dealing with is hazardous material. It's all sorts of material, but it is hazardous. Just a tip not very far away, or land which was filled. And under other circumstances, they discovered there was asbestos. And it's cost millions to clear up. Now, if you don't hit it early, if you don't get engaged with it early, if you try and fob people off, it will only get worse, and it will give confidence to those people who are illegally tipping. There is nothing today to stop the person who owns this land or who is responsible for this continuing to do it. No authority is coming in and stopping it. And there are just hundreds and hundreds of tons worth of tip material there on this site, which is periodically bursts into flames. We've had the fire brigade there recently for a couple of days trying to put something out. But of course, they can't use conventional means of putting fires out, like water, because they pour water on it and that will leach chemicals out into the watercourses. So it's a real problem. And there's another one near Rudford, smaller. It's smaller now, but again, nothing's being done. Okay. So we're going to our MPs, and we're going to, hopefully with publicity, something will be done. They'll be shamed into, I don't know.
Yeah, and actually, and we must say that Nisha Rowson, her local Labour MP, who I think is a minister, has been trying to help her, and he can't get anything done. The frustration, you can just hear it there, Preet.
No, absolutely. And, you would expect the Environment Agency to have taken legal action, to have gone to court much earlier, and to, use its powers. I think the government is really looking at this, especially I've heard people that, want to buy in, getting somebody to come in and take their waste. How do you know where it's going to be dumped? How do we track those number plates and make sure licences, have all the information in one place? So it is a challenge, but I'm glad he's gone to his MP, and, this does need to be raised. We cannot have this situation. It's unacceptable. Tim?
Yeah, the cost to human beings is really significant. We've heard that. What does it feel like to be living alongside that? What does it mean for our watercourses? It's hideous stuff. The financial cost estimated to the country, to the taxpayer every year, of clearing these up is about £1 billion a year. And
people are charged to dump their their material,
Yes.
aren't they? And there's a landfill tax. So are the costs too high, do you think?
I wonder. I think there is. I mean, this is to give no excuses whatsoever to the criminals who are doing this, but there is a sense in which local authority funding being contracted as it is in most parts of the country, certainly rural places like mine, we're seeing a 30% cut in 3 years in our area and some of our budgets. What does that mean? If councils have to put up tip prices significantly, people will then look to friendly people who agree to take it away for very little, and they won't know that's only the middle person, and the organised crime is further along. I think, yes, the Environment Agency needs to be cracking down, but when a site begins, we need to act there and then, because those sites are repeatedly used. The one at Kidlington, 6 or 7 months, Callum Miller has been fighting against that. So you start tracking it with cameras, you look at the cars, you follow them, and that might lead you to uncover a whole lot of other criminality as well. So there's a lack of seriousness, a lack of resource on the ground, and a lack of central coordination from government, and that's why the National Crime Agency needs to be taking hold of this.
Yeah, Nick, you're nodding away there. Just a final word to you, really, on what you think might be a solution to this, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. I think they've got to take it seriously, and and not on the ground. We're the people who experience it. We see it happening when we report. These things. They've got to come and investigate. They've got the powers. They've got the responsibilities as the agencies, and they need to do it. Otherwise, it just escalates, and we know what will happen then. And it's getting out of hand now. So I don't know what they need to be. I think they need to be taken into, encouraged and made to act, and the problems will be overcome.
Okay. Nick, thank you very much indeed for telling us all about what is going on there, and we will keep in touch with you to find out whether things start to improve there in Gloucester. Thank you for speaking to us today. Now let's have a look at the House of Commons. This is the scene in the chamber for Prime Minister's questions. It's actually not quite Prime Minister's questions because, as we know, Keir Starmer is in China on a visit. So his place will be taken by his deputy, David Lammy. And for the Conservatives, they tend to switch around. But today it's going to be the Shadow Business and Trade Secretary, Andrew Griffiths. I don't know if we can guess then what his questions are likely to be, but we'll be bringing you all of that live at noon. And one thing that might come up might be immigration, because this week there's been some talk about the one-in, one-out deal. This is the deal that was reached with France, which means that for every migrant the UK returns to France, somebody with a strong case for asylum in the UK is allowed in. The figures are saying that 281 migrants have been removed, but 350 have come in, Preet. Some would say that's not a success.
Well, look, this was a pilot, and it was never going to be the silver bullet to address illegal migration. Now, look, genuinely, my constituents, I have the whole gambit of housing, whether it's asylum, probation, dispersal. The scale and the pace of change of illegal immigration has significantly affected so many communities, and we have absolutely got to get a grip on this. And so, yes, that was a pilot scheme, but as you know, the Home Secretary with the White Paper has announced a huge heap of reforms, and they are right, because we've got to address the pull factors that bring people crossing the channel in the very first place. She set out some safe and legal routes. Obviously, people have to, they are for refugees. They are small in number at the moment. But let's not forget, Reform have taken on the immigration minister, who under his watch, 400 hotels opened at a cost of £9 million to the taxpayer. Now, we are reducing those. We are moving people out of hotels. That was a manifesto commitment that we made. Most importantly, we've got to tackle the backlog of cases, and they have come down by 18%. So there is a whole heap of reform.
But last year, 41,000 migrants came on boats across the Channel. That is dwarfing the figures who are in this scheme.
Absolutely. Look, the Police and Crime Bill did give powers in terms of, cross-security border working together with border enforcements with other countries. This was never going to be an overnight solution. It was never going to be just one thing. You have to do a range of things, as the Home Secretary set out, in order to bring those numbers down. Now we are getting through them. We are closing down the hotels. That's exactly what the public expect us to do, is to listen to their concerns, because otherwise we'll have Reform sowing division on this, and yet it is the Labour Party that is serious about addressing this issue. And I hope the British public do see through this, because taking on an immigration minister clearly says that Reform do not have an answer to this issue, and having a failed immigration minister, a failed immigration policy says it all. It's not going to address the issue.
But does your party want to cut the number of migrants coming here.
Well, look at the figures you just read out. They're piddly. I mean, there's a small deficit, shall we say, that there are fewer migrants being returned to France than there are coming.
The Home Office say that's to do with a logistical issue, and there will be other flights going.
There's not a lot in it. It's just a tiny number. Now, I want to say that the government has come up with a half-decent idea, one in, one out, and it's actually one. Biden doesn't get much praise, but Joe Biden came up with a scheme which worked very well with Mexico, and it worked because it was scaled up. It meant there was a huge reduction in the number of people trying to cross the border illegally, because those people with a case knew that they could make it, and those people without one were broadly humanely returned. And the problem is that the United Kingdom government has come up with quite a good idea with the France deal. It just doesn't have the courage of its convictions to actually back it, because most people who might benefit from it or indeed have something to fear from it just don't even know about it. And so in Home Office questions and other places, I've been pushing ministers, look, if this is an idea you believe in, and I think it's not a bad one, don't just treat it like a pilot, actually use it. It could be a safe route for those people who've got genuine need to be here as refugees, and a way of returning very quickly and humanely those who don't.
That is the scene in the House of Commons in the run-up to Prime Minister's questions, which will be coming along in about 5 minutes or so. But I'd like to welcome viewers from the BBC News Channel. Anita, we're talking about the possibility of immigration coming up as an issue. Who knows what it might be? But I mean, if you were Andrew Griffiths now and you're up against David Lammy, what would you do in Prime Minister's questions?
I mean, I think that actually there's a theme here, right? We've talked about there's a naivety in how the government has approached both, like when you think about China, but also when you talk about immigration, because I actually don't think that one in, one out idea is bad. But I think ultimately you do have to accept that it's in some way a deterrent, and therefore it has to operate like a deterrent. And therefore it's actually more important than most of your policies in being up and running and being at significant enough scale that people and asylum seekers do follow quite specifically like the kind of the nuances of the policies that make a decision and affect where they try to settle. But actually people do know this, and it acts as a meaningful disincentive. And I think that there has been a little bit of, if we just sort of, we sort of see what we can do when we move along very gradually, we might get there. And that is not the signal. The signal is the UK is going to be tough. And that is what we need to secure our borders. And that's what we need to stop.
The numbers will fluctuate. We've been really clear. But of course, the one in means that they've got to meet the safe legal route requirement. And that has been an issue. And actually, the reforms set by the Home Secretary are tough. Actually, what it gives confidence to people is that we are absolutely clear about addressing illegal migration, unlike the Conservatives, under whose watch it not only went up, but the taxpayer was paying £9 million a year to keep people in hotels. Unacceptable. And we've returned 50,000 people already. But addressing the pull factors is a real big deterrent.
I just think this approach, there was a real naivety, again, in thinking that what's happened with asylum is because of any individual government's policy. Every single country in Europe has been faced with the reality that because of the turbulence of this world, there are many more people who, if they can't live in their home country, would rather live in a country such as the UK, where people can succeed, where there's openness to minorities. All of those reasons exist in reality. And therefore pretending that actually there is a silver bullet, or that there were several things the government did wrong, I accept is actually a problem for a democracy in this country where we believe there's easy answers.
Completely right. I totally agree with all of that. Yes, I mean, the best deterrent we could have is having a competent system where you return people who are not genuine refugees. But let's not pretend we're the only people suffering. France has 3 times more asylum seekers than we do. Germany, 4 times more. It's worth remembering that 85% of refugees remain in the country next door to the one that they have fled from, places like Egypt, for example. So it's not to minimise the problem we have, but if we don't have a grown-up conversation about the reality of the pull factors, the push factors are far, far, far bigger. When you're fleeing tyrants like, Isaias Afwerki in Eritrea, where if you're a Christian young man, you will be conscripted to murder your own people. Of course you're going to leave. And the lack of understanding of those things pollutes the debate and makes it...
We are a welcoming country. We're not saying that we're not going to accept genuine refugees, but I'm sorry, my constituents are really fed up of seeing lots of single men coming on their own, not having, not fleeing from certain countries. The pace of change, you can say, oh gosh, the pace of change has been so significant that it is impacting services locally, and then Reform will use this to sow division. People in my communities, where 14 years of Conservatives have had services decimated, say to me, Preet, no one is talking about the impact of 14 years of Conservative rule with me and why our services
let Tim
being
just
stripped
come
away.
back in there.
Why are they mostly single men? And I'll tell you why. Because when I went to Cairo last year, I met a young woman who was the chair of the Young Mothers Association of women from 14 to 18. Every single one of them was a young mother because she'd been raped. And the reality is, it is unsafe, so unsafe for women to be travelling those circumstances. And so, yes, the men will leave in the hope of providing for their family and creating a new life. But we need to... I'm sorry, Preet, you sounded like a Reform MP.
No, that's not true.
We need to be aware.
You don't
it's not
understand.
to defend these
People
sort of things.
fleeing persecution go to the country near them.
Yes.
They don't travel all the way shopping where they get various services, as a lot of single men coming here. We are doing returns.
If you live in a former British colony, if you speak English, if you've got family here...
to the House of Commons for Prime Minister's questions.
Mr. Speaker, I've been asked to reply on behalf of the Prime Minister.